My name is Ruth Callahan. I'm 65 years old, and 3 weeks before my only son's wedding, I found my own name on his invitation, crossed out in hard black marker, like a mistake somebody wanted gone for good. For months, I tried to make sense of it, but nothing prepared me for the phone call that came the morning he was supposed to get married. A stranger's voice, a secret she'd been carrying for years, and the truth about the woman my boy was about to marry. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. My son Ethan was 38 that autumn, a heart surgeon with steady hands and a good name in this town. And the woman he was set to marry, Sloane Ashford, was 34, the kind of polish that made a woman like me, who'd had flour under her nails for 40 years, suddenly aware of her own hands. My husband Frank had been gone 13 years by then, taken at 58 by the very thing his son would grow up to fix in other people's chests. I tell you all this up front because by the end you'll understand that this was never really a story about a wedding. It was a story about who gets to stand beside you when everything falls apart and who's been quietly working to make sure nobody does. The invitation came on a Tuesday in August. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, the Wexford Manor crest pressed into the corner. Ethan Francis Callahan and Sloane Margaret Ashford request the honor of your presence. I propped it against the sugar canister on my kitchen counter, and I'll admit it. I cried a little. The good kind, the kind that sneaks up on you when your child does something you spent your whole life hoping for. I ran my thumb over his name a dozen times that first week. I should tell you about the bakery, because you can't understand me without it. Callahan's on Linden Street in Hartwell, Ohio, population just under 9,000, the kind of place where the same 11 cars are parked outside the diner every morning, and everybody knows whose dog got loose. Frank and I bought the building outright in 1989, scraped together every dime, and Frank, he was a carpenter by trade. He built the front counter himself out of white oak, sanded it down on his knees, rubbed the oil in with an old undershirt. That counter is still there. 36 years of elbows have worn the front edge smooth and pale. There's a door frame in the back, by the proof box where the dough rises, and Frank penciled Ethan's height on it every birthday from age 3 to 16. EC. 7, so tall now. I have never painted over those marks. I never will. I open at 4:30 in the morning, have for decades. When Frank died, a heart that just quit one ordinary March afternoon while he was changing the oil in the truck, I picked up double shifts. I didn't think a body could survive, so Ethan could finish medical school without a mountain of loans on his back. I'd close the shop at 2, sleep till 9, then drive the hour to the city to clean office buildings till midnight. People ask me how I did it. I never had a good answer. You just do it when it's for your kid. You put one foot down and then the other one, and you don't look up. And it paid off, is the thing. I watched that boy walk across a stage in a white coat. I watched him hold a human heart in his 2 hands and start beating again. There's a photo behind my register. Ethan in his scrubs, first year as an attending, grinning so wide you'd think he invented the sun. For a long time, that was the proudest thing in my life. So when did my grateful, tender boy turn into a man who could cross his mother off a list? It didn't happen all at once. That's the part nobody warns you about. It happened the way water wears down stone, slow, and then suddenly the shape of everything is different. It started when his practice took off. New money brought new friends, fancier clothes, a watch that probably cost more than my truck. His visits got shorter and further between. And then 3 years ago, at a fundraiser gala for the new cardiac wing, where they'd honored him, my Ethan, up on a stage with a little crystal award, he met Sloane. Sloane Ashford was a wealth manager, managed money for rich people, made it richer, took her cut. The Ashfords were what folks around here call old money. Name carved over a library entrance, a wing of the art museum, the kind of family that had a pew. She was beautiful in a way that felt expensive, like she'd been maintained rather than just born. The first time Ethan brought her to the bakery, she looked around at my white oak counter and my faded curtains and my flour-dusted floor with a little smile that didn't quite make it to her eyes, and she said, "It's so charming, Mrs. Callahan, so authentic. The way she said authentic, you'd have thought it was a polite word for poor. Call me Ruth, I told her. Of course, she said. And then for 3 years she called me Mother. Never Mom, never Ruth, Mother. Cold and formal, like a title on a door. Looking back, I can see all the little hooks she set. She'd ask me things, gentle, conversational things, that I now know were appraisals. This building must be worth a fortune in this market, Mother. Have you thought about what you'll do when running the shop gets to be too much? My firm does a lot of retirement planning, you know. I could pull some numbers for you. I thought she was being kind. I thought, well, maybe she's warmer than she lets on. Lord, I was a fool. She wasn't getting to know me. She was taking inventory. The break came at dinner 6 months before the wedding at a restaurant in the city, so fancy I had to dip into my own savings just to cover my share. They ordered champagne before I even had my coat off. Sloane slid her phone across the table. Photos of Wexford Manor, the ballroom, the gardens, a chandelier the size of my car. We got the manor, she said, like she was announcing a moon landing. There's usually a 2-year wait list, but Daddy made a couple calls. That's wonderful, honey, I said, and I meant it, even with my stomach starting to tighten. Ethan cleared his throat, and I knew that throat clear. I've known that throat clear since he was 9 years old asking for a dirt bike. So, Mom, here's the thing. With the deposit on the manor and the honeymoon and the down payment we're putting together on the place at Riverside, we're a little stretched. What Ethan's trying to say, Sloane cut in, reaching over to lay her cool hand on top of mine, is that the building, the bakery. In this market, it's got to be worth, what, 450? If you sold it, Mother, you could move somewhere lovely. Sunny Pines has a gorgeous memory garden, and you could help us start our life the right way. I sat there. I genuinely could not speak. They'd already priced my home. They'd already picked out where to put me. I'm not selling the bakery, I said finally, and I pulled my hand out from under hers. That's where your father built that counter, Ethan. That's where you grew up. Ethan's jaw went tight in a way I'd never seen on him. This is exactly why I didn't want to ask, he said, to her, not to me, like I'd left the room. She's always been stubborn about that place. It's way too much for her to handle alone anyway. I handle it just fine, I said, and my voice was shaking now. I've handled it alone for 13 years. It's not handling it, it's clinging, Sloane said, that little smile back. No offense, Mother, but there comes a time. I won't repeat everything that got said. Ethan called me selfish, said I was choosing a building over his happiness. Sloane suggested all velvet, that if I really loved my son, I'd want to help. And then Ethan put down his fork and said the thing that I carried around in my chest like a stone for months afterward. Either you help us start our life the right way, Mom, or don't expect to be part of it. Your call. They left. I paid the bill, $311. I'll never forget it. And I drove the hour home with my hands at 10 and 2, and my eyes blurring so bad I had to pull over twice. For weeks I tried to fix it. I called. I texted. I drove to his office once, and a very apologetic young woman at the desk told me Dr. Callahan was unavailable. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, he mailed my own invitation back to me, my name slashed out in black marker, and underneath, in my son's handwriting, since you've chosen not to support our future, you shouldn't be part of its beginning. I sat on my porch swing that night and watched the sun go down over the garden Frank planted, and I made up my mind. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to beg, but I was going to be there. I'd sit in the back, quiet as a mouse, and witness my only child get married, even if he never knew I came. A mother holds space, even when there's no space being held for her. I had no earthly idea that the morning of that wedding was going to bring a phone call that blew the whole thing wide open. The week before the wedding crawled by. Every morning I woke with the same hollow feeling, reached for my phone hoping for some sign he'd softened, and every morning the screen was blank. On the Wednesday, I went up to the attic, a place I avoided since Frank passed. I was looking for one specific thing, and I found it at the bottom of a cedar chest wrapped in an old shop apron, Frank's wood level. The good one. Brass and oak with a bubble vial he'd babied for 30 years. He used to set it on a shelf I just hung and say, Ruthie, a thing's only as good as it is true. Get it level or don't bother. I'd had a fellow at the hardware store clean it up and re-oil the wood, and I'd wrapped it as a wedding gift for Ethan, a surgeon, a man who lived and died by steady, by true, even though I had no hope of handing it to him. I tucked a card inside. May you always stay level and true to the foundation you came from. Love, Mom. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. A storm rolled through around midnight, thunder rattling the old windows, and I lay there thinking how Ethan used to crawl into our bed during storms. Even at 10, 11, too old to admit he was scared, and Frank would say, "It's just the sky clearing its throat, bud. Go on back." By dawn, the rain had passed. My best friend Lorraine Walsh was picking me up at 8:30. Lorraine's 71, retired ER nurse, spent 15 years patching up people in places I can't pronounce with Doctors Without Borders, and she does not have a soft edge anywhere on her. When I told her my plan to slip into the back of the wedding, she'd looked at me flat over her chai and said, "Ellie, you've got more grace than sense, but fine. I'm not letting you walk into that lion's den alone." So at 8:30, dressed in a gray dress with a thread of silver in it and a borrowed strand of Lorraine's pearls, I picked up my handbag off the entry table. The wrapped level sat there beside it. The wedding wasn't till 11, and Wexford Manor was clear on the other side of the city, so we wanted to leave early enough to find a quiet corner. My hand was on the doorknob when the kitchen phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Lorraine was already in the driveway. But something, call it frank, call it a mother's gut, turned me around. "Hello?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar, tight, like she'd been working up the nerve. "Is this Ruth Callahan?" "Ethan Callahan's mother?" "Yes." "Who's calling?" "My name is Diane Mercer. We've never met." A shaky breath. "I'm a wedding planner, and I think there's something you need to know about your son's wedding. About Sloan." "I'm sorry, I didn't know who else to call." Through the window, I watched Lorraine tap her watch. I held up a finger, and something in my face must have told her, because she settled back in the car. "I'm listening," I said, and I sat down hard in the chair by the phone. "Mrs. Callahan, I have to ask you something first. Did Sloan or your son ask you to sell your home, your business, to help pay for the wedding?" I felt the floor tilt. How could a stranger know that? "Yes," I said, barely above a whisper. "They did." That bitter little laugh, no humor in it at all. "That's the pattern. That's why I'm calling. You're not the first, Mrs. Callahan, not by a long shot." "The first what?" "Sloan Ashford has been engaged 3 times in the past 7 years, Diane said, flat, like she was reading off a chart. "Every single time, it's the same play. She finds a man who's done well for himself, a professional, good income, but who isn't rich, no family fortune of his own, and his parents own property, free and clear. She gets the family pressured into selling the house, taking out loans, liquidating whatever they've got, all to pay for some over-the-top wedding. And then she calls it off, right before the ceremony. After the deposits are spent and the money's already moved." I sank deeper into the chair. "You're telling me she's what, some kind of con artist?" "I'm telling you she's calculated," Diane said. "First time I worked one of her weddings, I figured it was just a bride who got cold feet. His parents had sold a lake cabin to cover a venue downtown. Engagement blew up 2 weeks before, after the deposits cleared. Second time," her voice cracked. "Second time I told myself it couldn't be the same person doing it on purpose. His mom took out a reverse mortgage, same ending. Engagement off, money gone, and Sloan somehow comes out looking like the heartbroken victim. Wait, my head was spinning. You worked her weddings, both of them?" "I planned her first 2, Diane said. Both got canceled at the last minute, and both times I got a stiffed on my final invoice. That's how I ended up keeping every contract, every deposit receipt, every email. Out of spite, honestly, to prove I was owed." A pause. "I'm not the planner this time. She used somebody else. She's not stupid enough to hire the woman who watched her do it twice. But a vendor I know mentioned an Ashford wedding at Wexford this weekend, and I about dropped the phone. I looked up your son. He's a surgeon, easy to find, and his mother runs a bakery. And the number's right there on your shop's website. I went back and forth for 2 days. And then I couldn't sit on it again, not knowing what's coming for you. She started sending me things while we talked. My old desktop wheezed to life, and Lorraine came in. She'd given up on the car. and the two of us hunched over the screen as the attachments loaded. It was all there. Contracts from 2 prior weddings, 2 different grooms with the same bride's name, deposit receipts, a photo of a lake cabin with a sold sticker slapped across the listing. And then the second wave of documents, and these stopped my heart. Mrs. Callahan, Diane said, there's more, and it's worse. Sloan lost her job 3 months ago. She was fired. Fired? She told us she'd been promoted. She was let go for falsifying client billings. It's in the documents. I have a friend in the industry who confirmed it. She's not some heiress with a cushion to fall back on. She's drowning. Over 200 grand in debt, cards, shopping, some gambling. The Ashford name still opens doors, sure, but the money behind it dried up years ago. It's all reputation now, all show, a breath. This wedding isn't a celebration for her. It's an escape hatch. I looked at Lorraine. Lorraine, who'd seen everything, had gone pale, but it was the last folder that nearly put me on the floor. Diane had pulled what she could on the financial side, and laid against those old victims' paper trails were the early signs of the same thing happening to my son. She's already started on him, hasn't she? Diane said quietly, like she already knew. Look at the dates. I looked. Over the past few months, under the loving banner of planning our future together, Sloan had gotten Ethan to move the bulk of his savings and investments into a jointly held account she controlled. And he'd taken out a large personal line of credit. For the down payment, the notes said, money that was flowing straight into accounts that, when you followed the trail, were quietly bleeding out to cover Sloan's debts. Real money, Ethan's money, already gone or as good as. And then it clicked, why the fury when I said no. Why my name got slashed so hard the pen nearly tore through the cardstock. The bakery my building owned free and clear was the last piece, the keystone, the big chunk that would have covered the whole, and I'd refused. Without knowing it, I'd protected the only thing she hadn't already gotten her hands on. My God, Ellie, Lorraine breathed. I looked at the clock, 9:51 a.m. The ceremony was at 11. Diane, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Is there proof he'd believe? Because my son is. He's in love with this woman, or he thinks he is. He won't take my word. It's all in your inbox, she said. Contracts, the firing, the money trail, the other groom's parents. 2 of them are willing to talk now. Their names are in there. Brian Keller and Aaron Brody. If Ethan won't listen to you, maybe he'll listen to the men who lived it. I thanked her. I don't think thank you covered it, but it's what I had. And then I hung up and turned to Lorraine. He's blocked my number, I said. He won't take a call from me if I dialed it 100 times. Then we don't call, Lorraine said, already grabbing her keys. We go. We tried his best man first. Greg Tanner, Ethan's roommate from freshman year, a big, soft-hearted guy who used to eat me out of house and home every Thanksgiving break. Straight to voicemail. I left a message I'm sure sounded half crazy. Greg, it's Ruth Callahan, please. It's about Ethan. It's urgent. Call me the second you get this. Then I gathered up everything I'd printed into a folder and we drove. Lorraine took the highway at a speed I won't put a number on, both hands tight on the wheel. Frank always said I was too protective. I said somewhere around the city limits, that I had to let Ethan make his own mistakes. There's mistakes and there's getting cleaned out by a professional, Lorraine said grimly. This ain't a learning experience, Ellie. This is a robbery with a registry. Wexford Manor came up on the left, manicured to within an inch of its life, luxury cars filling the lot, guests in their finery already drifting toward the garden. And right there at the entrance, a security guy in a blazer checking names off a list. Lorraine parked at the far end. We sat a second. Service entrance, I said. There's always a back way in, deliveries, catering. Lorraine actually smiled. Now you're thinking like the Ellie I trained with. We walked the perimeter like we belonged there, and around the back we found exactly what I knew we would. Caterers hustling trays in and out of a plain utility door. Lorraine smoothed her dress, put on the face I imagined she used to make interns cry, and marched up to a frazzled kid balancing a tower of champagne flutes. Excuse me, we're looking for the groom's suite. Miss Ashford sent us up with an urgent message from Mr. Callahan. The kid didn't even slow down. 2nd floor, east wing. But they're heading down in like 5, so y'all better book it. We slipped inside into the controlled chaos of a high-dollar wedding in its last minutes and followed the signs upstairs. The second-floor hallway was hushed, thick carpet swallowing our steps. A burst of male laughter led us to a door marked Room Suite. I stopped. My hand wouldn't lift to knock. What if he doesn't believe me? I whispered. What if this just shoves him further away? Lorraine squeezed my hand. Truth's still the truth, Ellie, even when it costs. Especially when it costs. Knock. So I knocked. Greg opened it, sharp in his tucks, but somehow smaller than I remembered, like the years with Ethan and Sloane had worn him thin, too. His eyes went round. Mrs. C, what are you doing here? Ethan said you weren't. Greg, please. My voice cracked right down the middle. I have to see my son. It's about Sloane. It can't wait. Something flickered across his face. Doubt. Like maybe deep down he wasn't all that surprised. Who's at the door? Ethan's voice from inside. Greg stepped back, and then the door pulled all the way open, and there was my boy. In his tux, broad-shouldered, the spitting image of his father at that age. It knocked the wind clean out of me for a second. He stared like he was seeing a ghost. Mom, half a whisper. Then his face hardened over like ice on a pond. What are you doing here? I made it pretty clear you weren't welcome. The cold in it cut deep, but Diane's voice was in my head. Ethan, please, 5 minutes. There's something you have to see before you do this. I don't need to see anything except that you'd rather keep a building than see me happy, he snapped. I can't believe you'd show up here to make a scene on my wedding day. I'm not here to make a scene. I was hanging on to steady by my fingernails. I'm here because I love you too much to keep my mouth shut. Lorraine stepped up beside me. Ethan, your mother got a phone call this morning about Sloane. You need to hear it, son. His face went red. So you brought backup to ambush me. Unbelievable. You've never given her a fair shot, not once, because she sees right through you. Ethan Francis Callahan. My mother voice, the one I hadn't used on him in 20 years, and it cut him off clean. I have never once lied to you, and I'm not about to start on the worst day to do it. 5 minutes. And if you still want to marry her after, I'll walk out of here and you will never have to see me again. I promise you that. Maybe it was the promise. Maybe it was the way my voice didn't waver on it. He glanced at Greg, who gave the smallest nod. Then he looked at his watch. 5 minutes, he said ice cold. In here. He pointed to a little sitting room across the hall, away from the groomsmen, and shut the door behind the three of us. I didn't waste a second. I opened the folder. Sloane has been engaged 3 times before this, I started. Every time she finds a man who's done well but isn't rich, whose parents own their home outright. Every time she pressures the family to sell or borrow to pay for a huge wedding. And every time she calls it off right before the ceremony, after the money's already moved. He stared at me like I'd started speaking in tongues. That's insane. That's actually insane, Mom. I wish it were. I handed him the printouts. These are contracts from 2 of those weddings. Different grooms, same bride. This one's a lake cabin his parents sold. This one's a reverse mortgage. His hands weren't quite steady as he flipped through. Anybody can fake a contract. Then look at these. I laid down the next pages, gentle, the way you set something in front of a man you're about to hurt. These are your accounts, Ethan, your statements. The line of credit you took out 3 weeks ago. The money she told you was going into investments. Follow it. It's not going where she told you. And here, I tapped the last sheet. Here's the report that she was fired 3 months ago for cooking client billings. The whole time she's been telling you she got promoted. He went very still. He read the line about the firing twice. Then he set the page down on his knee with a hand that had gone bloodless, and I watched my son, who could hold a stopped heart in his palm and not flinch, start to shake. She showed me emails from clients, he said, almost to himself. She gets dressed every morning. She goes to work. She goes somewhere, sweetheart, I said, soft. It isn't work. He looked up at me, and for 1 second, the surgeon and the rich man and the cold stranger all fell away, and it was just my little boy after a thunderstorm. Why me? He asked. Why would she pick me? Because you're exactly who she looks for, I said. A man who did everything right but doesn't have a cushion. A man who lost his dad too young and threw himself into his work and got a little lonely doing it. I reached out, didn't quite touch him. a man who'd give anything to feel like he belonged somewhere fancy. She didn't fall in love with you, baby. She did her homework. His eyes went wet. He looked down at the evidence in his lap, at the two strangers' names, Brian Keller, Aaron Brody, fathers and mothers who'd been gutted by the exact same woman. A sharp knock. Greg's head poked in, tense. Ethan, they need you downstairs. Officiant says we start in 5 or we lose the garden slot. Ethan stared at the papers, then at me. What do I do? He asked, and he sounded younger than I'd heard him in a decade. There's 200 people out there, her whole family, everyone I know. You've got choices, Lorraine said, brisk and kind. You can fake an emergency and postpone. You can go through with it and deal with the wreckage after, or you can end it. Right now. He ran a hand through his hair exactly the way Frank used to when he was wrestling something hard, and stood up. I need to see her, he said. I need to look her in the eye when I ask. I'm not doing this off a folder, even if every word's true. I need to hear it from her. That may be exactly what she wants, Lorraine warned. She'll talk her way around you if you give her room. Maybe. He squared his shoulders, and there was the steel I hadn't seen since he was a boy, but I have to do it my way. He turned to me at the door. His voice was thick. Thank you for coming, for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you. And before I could answer, he walked out into the hall, brushed past a startled Walter Ashford without a word, and went looking for his bride. Lorraine and I made our way down the back stairs and found a window with a view of the corridor outside the bridal suite. We couldn't hear, but Lord, could we see. Sloane stood there in a gown that probably cost more than my truck and my inventory combined, radiant and confused as Ethan spoke, his back to us. We watched her face cycle through it, disbelief, then a soft, wounded look, her hand going to his arm, her mouth shaping words I'd have bet money were. Mother is jealous, mother is lying, you know how she's always been. For a second, I saw Ethan's shoulders waver. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out the papers. I have watched a lot of faces in my 65 years behind that counter, at that hospital, at Frank's bedside. I have never seen a face change like Sloane Ashford's changed in that hallway. The wounded bride evaporated. What came up underneath was something flat and cold and calculating. And then, when she realized this one wasn't going to fold, that the money was about to walk, it went incandescent. She snatched at the papers, ripped a couple before he stepped back. Her voice came up loud enough that we caught it through the door. You ungrateful, pathetic little. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Who do you think wants you without me? You're a small-town doctor with a bakery for a mother and a closet full of off-the-rack suits, and I made you presentable. Ethan said something quiet. I couldn't hear it, but it landed like a slap because Sloane recoiled, and then she grabbed a crystal vase off a side table and threw it. Exploded against the wall a foot from his head. Glass everywhere. Staff came running, and Sloane Ashford swept past all of them, the train of that gown dragging through the shards, and was gone. Ethan stood there a moment, his back to me, shoulders dropping. Not in defeat, I realized, in relief. Like setting down something he'd been carrying so long, he'd forgotten the weight of it. Greg appeared at his side and said something, and the two of them disappeared through another door. Then it was the matter of 200 people in a garden, waiting for a wedding that wasn't going to happen. The Ashfords moved fast. By the time Ethan had collected himself, Walter and Sloane's mother were already working the crowd, and the story they were spinning was that Ethan had suffered some kind of breakdown, a panic attack, poor thing. He's resting, sedated, will reschedule, heroic, supportive, the wounded family standing by their stricken, almost son. The wedding coordinator found Ethan and floated it to him, all delicate. Is that the narrative you'd like us to support, Mr. Callahan? A medical situation? Ethan looked at her like she'd offered him a snake. I'm not sedated, and I'm not having a medical crisis, he said. And I'm not starting the next chapter of my life with a lie, however convenient. He turned to me and to Lorraine and to Greg. Tell the guests I'll make a statement in the main hall in 15 minutes. And he did. I stood at the back with Lorraine, prouder than words could hold, and watched my son walk to the center of that grand room full of confused, whispering people in their finest clothes and stand up straight. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, thank you all for coming. His surgeon's voice, clear and calm, carried to the back. And I'm sorry, there won't be a ceremony today. This morning I learned things about my relationship that make a marriage impossible. I won't share the details, out of respect for everyone's privacy, including Sloane's. But I want to be clear that this is my decision, made with a clear head, and I take full responsibility for it. A breath, the dinner's paid for. You're all welcome to stay. And for those who'd rather go, I understand completely, thank you. There was a beat of stunned quiet. And then, Greg started it. I saw him. A ripple of applause moved through that room. Not for a wedding. For a man telling the truth on the worst day to tell it. We didn't get out of Wexford for almost 2 hours. Ethan insisted on thanking every vendor, every server, shaking hands with the guests who came up to wish him well. He was gray in the face by the end of it, but he stood there and took it, and that was its own kind of brave. We weren't quite done with the Ashfords, though. Walter caught me in the corridor by the broken glass, and his face was thunderous. You, he said, advancing. This is your doing. You couldn't stand to see your son happy. You poisoned him against my daughter because you're jealous of her. Mr. Ashford, I stood my ground. Before you finished that sentence, I talked to your daughter. Because she has a pattern. 3 engagements. 3 families left to clean up after her. Money that never came back. And here's the thing I'll never forget. His face didn't do what an innocent father's face would do. It didn't crumple into confused horror. For just a flicker, something else crossed it. Not shock, fear. The look of a man worried about being found out. That's defamation, he said. I could sue you into the ground. You could, Lorraine said, smooth as cream. And then every bit of it becomes part of the public record, the contracts, the bank trail. 2 other families ready to talk. You want all of that on the record, Mr. Ashford? He went quiet, straightened his tie to buy himself a second. And when he spoke again, his voice had dropped into something oily and reasonable. Look, every couple has nerves before a wedding. This is a misunderstanding. Let's not turn it into something it isn't. Perhaps a private arrangement. A private arrangement. That's when I understood. He wasn't a duped father. He'd known, maybe for years. Maybe he'd cleaned up after Sloane before, made the embarrassments go away, because the Ashford coffers needed whatever she could bring in just as bad as she did. He wasn't blindsided. He was invested. I think we're done here, Mr. Ashford, I said, and we were. It didn't end clean, of course. Real life never does. The next morning, Ethan, who'd stayed in my guest room over the bakery, the first night he'd slept under my roof in years, got a phone call that drained the color right out of him. It was Dr. Harold Levin, chief of surgery at St. Augustine. The Ashfords were major donors. Their name was on a plaque in the lobby, and Walter had made a call. Ethan was being asked to take a leave of absence until this unfortunate personal situation resolves itself. They're putting me on ice, Ethan said, setting his phone down on Frank's white oak counter, reassigning my patients, because I wouldn't marry a woman who was robbing me. Can they do that? I asked, sliding a plate of eggs in front of him he didn't touch. They can do whatever they want when there's enough money in the room, Mom, he said. Office politics don't care about fair. And then Sloane went to war. By that afternoon, she'd posted across every platform, praying for Ethan's recovery, standing by him through his struggles, dropping just enough hints about things he kept hidden to imply he was unstable, maybe an addict. Emails went out to his colleagues, old classmates, even a couple of his patients, all dripping with fake concern about his increasingly erratic behavior. She was salting the earth, making sure that if Ethan ever told the truth about why he called it off, nobody would believe him. That's the part that nearly broke him. If I defend myself, I look defensive and crazy, he said, sitting on my porch swing that evening, his head in his hands. If I say nothing, her story just becomes the truth. She's got me boxed in, but here's where it turned. Because Diane had given me 2 names, and those 2 names turned out to be men who'd been waiting years for someone, anyone, to stand up to Sloane Ashford so they wouldn't have to do it alone. Brian Keller and Aaron Brody got on a video call with Ethan that very night, and the 3 of them sat there, strangers bound by the same wound, and started building a case. Diane had the documents. Brian and Aaron had their own paper, their own stories, and the firing, for fraud, That was the loose thread that unraveled the whole sweater. Because Sloane's financial crimes weren't a he said, she said. They were on the record. Lorraine showed up with a casserole and her laptop and a friend who knew a reporter. Greg used his PR job to draft Ethan a real statement. My little apartment over the bakery turned into a war room, and somewhere in the middle of it, watching my son lean over that table with his sleeves rolled up and a spark back in his eyes, I thought, Frank, you should see him. There was one more thing to find, though, and it was the worst one. A few days later, Ethan went to his old apartment to clear out the last of Sloane's things, with Diane along to help him sort what was hers. He came back to the bakery that night and sat down across from me at the kitchen table and slid his phone over, and his hand was trembling. Mom, I need you to look at something, and I need you to tell me the truth. On the screen were screenshots, text messages, emails, all of them supposedly from me. Me calling Sloane a gold digger to a mutual friend. Me telling Ethan I'd never accept the marriage, that I thought he was a fool, that I'd cut him off if he went through with it. Cruel, vicious things in what looked like my words. She showed me these, Ethan said, barely able to get it out. Months ago, whenever I'd want to call you. She'd pull these up and say, look what your mother's saying behind your back. I thought you started it. I thought you rejected me first. I read them with my heart cracking right down the middle. Ethan, I said, I never wrote a word of this. Not one. I don't even know half these people. I know, he whispered. I know that now. Diane spotted it. The formatting's wrong. The numbers don't match your phone. She faked all of it, every bit. He put his face in his hands. She didn't just go after my money, Mom. She built a wall between us, brick by brick, so that when it all came down, you wouldn't be standing there to catch me. We sat with that a long while, the two of us, in the kitchen Frank built. And here's the thing I want you to understand, because it matters. I could have let him off the hook right then. It would have been the easy thing. It wasn't your fault. She tricked you, you couldn't have known. And a lot of it was true. But my son looked up at me with his father's eyes and said, don't do that. Don't make it all her. She forged the messages, yeah. But I'm the one who chose to believe them instead of just calling you. I'm the one who crossed your name off that invitation. I did that, Mom. Me. And he let himself sit in it. He didn't flinch away from his own part. And I'll tell you, that was the moment I knew I had my boy back. Not when he hugged me, when he held himself accountable. It came apart for Sloane, the way these things finally do, not in one big explosion, but all at once, quietly, from every direction. The threat of a public record, two former victims willing to go on record. The forged messages which crossed a line even her father's money couldn't smooth over. Word got around the way it does. The firm Walter was tied to landed under investigation for unrelated reasons that suddenly weren't so unrelated. The hospital, faced with the actual facts and a couple pointed letters from a lawyer Ethan hired, quietly reinstated him and stopped returning the Ashfords' calls. And Sloane left town. Last I heard, she was 3 states over. I don't spend much time wondering. People like that always find a new garden to ruin. I just hope the next family gets a phone call like I did. I want to leave you somewhere gentler than that, though, because that's not where the story ends. It's nearly summer now here in Hartwell. June, if you want the truth of it, with the windows of the bakery thrown open and the smell of the peonies Frank planted drifting in over the smell of bread. Ethan's back at St. Augustine, but he made a change. He takes a shift now at a community heart clinic over in the next county, the kind of place that sees folks without insurance, people who'd have just let the chest pain ride. He says it's the best work he does all week. He says it the way Frank used to talk about a chair he'd built that came out true, quiet, and proud in a way that doesn't need an audience. He's been seeing someone too. Her name's Claire Donovan, a pediatric ICU nurse he'd worked beside for years and somehow never really seen until his eyes got cleared out. She came by the bakery last Sunday and ate 2 cinnamon rolls and laughed at Lorraine's terrible jokes and got flour on her sleeve and didn't seem to mind one bit. I'm not rushing anything, but I watched her watch my son, and there wasn't an appraisal anywhere in it. Just somebody glad he was in the room. This past weekend, Ethan came down to the shop early, 4:30, dark out, just me and the proof box and the radio. He didn't say much. He just washed his hands and tied on one of Frank's old aprons and started knocking down dough beside me, like he'd never stopped the two of us working. Quiet in that you can only have with somebody you don't have to talk to. The light came up gray and then gold through the front window, over the white oak counter his father built, and I thought my heart might just give out from the fullness of it. I gave him the level that morning. Frank's good brass and oak level, cleaned up and wrapped in the box I'd carried to a wedding that never happened. He opened the card, "May you always stay level and true to the foundation you came from," and he had to set it down on the counter and press the heel of his hand against his eyes, the same way he did when he was small. "I almost lost all of it," he said. "The money, sure, but you, this place, Dad's counter. I almost handed it all to a stranger because she made me feel like it wasn't enough." "But you didn't," I said. "You came home." He set that level on the worn front edge of his father's counter, and we both watched the little bubble drift and settle and come to rest dead center. True. The wedding I got crossed out of never happened. And in its place, I got something a whole lot better. My son, back in his right mind, standing in his truth in the place where he grew up, with people around him who love him for nothing more than who he is. That's an inheritance no con artist can ever touch. Frank used to say, "A thing's only as good as it is true." We got it level. Finally, we got it true. I sat with this story for a long time before I told it, and one thing kept circling back to me. The best con artists don't take your money first. They take away the people who'd warn you first. And Sloane never came at Ethan by reaching for his wallet. She came at him by building a wall between him and his mother, and so that when it all fell apart, there'd be nobody left standing beside him. And the part that stops me cold every time is Ruth. After everything that boy said to her, she still kept the lights on in that bakery, waiting for him to come home. And maybe the one thing stronger than a plan that took years to build is a mother who simply refuses to quit. If this one got to you, do me a favor and tell me down in the comments. Who's the person who always leaves a light on for you?